Alright, welcome back. So, I left off here on page 4, completed that, making sure I assembled, I took care of this part according to having a closed engine and gun cowling. And out of all the parts for the engine, the only parts one uses for that are the two halves of the block, these three parts for the prop, and then these two parts here, which this mounts to the inside of the fuselage, and that's it. So tells me to skip ahead to page 10, and that is the way to put it together instead of page 5. Big difference being the engine looks different. So I've got everything all prepped for the engine to be installed, as far as cutting off this little red spot right here so the cowling fits. And I did do a test fit with the cowling on the with it all taped together, and it fits properly. So with that, what I'm going to do is, I think it would be best to follow this picture here, install the exhaust pipes, paint the engine, and paint this part here the color it's supposed to be, get all that painted, and then I can start to assemble the fuselage halves with the engine and cockpit in place. So I'm going to put the exhaust on, start getting this painted up, get the exhaust weathered, and come back and see what we've got going on. Okay, back again. I decided not to do the exhaust. I'm going to do that after I get the plane assembled. I figured it would just be a little easier after thinking about it. The engine, as it shows here, it shows the exhaust attached, and that's what I did. However, it can be kind of tricky to put the fuselage halves together with the exhaust on. So what I did is I put it on the one on this side here. Let me see if I can replicate what no, I'm not going to take it apart. Installed on this side, no cement or anything, just left it loose. Then what I did is I put the fuselage together, and I had to kind of bend this little part. It's just a very thin piece of plastic, and you want to be careful you don't break it, but bend it out just enough and twist this side just enough to where you can get the exhaust into the slot and back a little bit. Then you can snap it together. So it can be done. So with that, now I can start cementing the fuselage together. Now the way I do fuselages, and some people may do this already, some people I know do the whole shoot match at once. However, this is the way I like to do it. Test fit everything first, make sure everything lines up and there's nothing too weird going on. Once I do that, I kind of plan out how I'm going to put it all together. And what I do is I cement the parts in stages. For example, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to cement the front first. So I make sure everything lines up as closely as possible, okay, with minimal seams, and then figure out a way to clamp it. And in this case, using the spring clamp from above, not from below, and clamping on these two bumps right here, I can clamp that together, and then if I need to, I can make just very minor, small adjustments to get it to line up, so I'll have minimal cleanup. So as you can see here with this clamped, it is very flush very smooth, and that cleanup will be should be very easy because it fits together so well. So I'll do that. Then I will do this part here and make sure it's fitting the radiator on the inside as it should. I'll cement that. Then I'll move back here after making sure everything's lined up properly. I will do the bottom here. I'll make sure it's all lined up, cement it, and clamp that. Make sure that's all good. Then I'll do this little part right here, and then just work my way around. And that way I minimize the chance of something becoming misaligned while clamping something else, and it'll facilitate easier cleanup and seam line reduction. So I'm going to start with this and then move on. And I think while this is while I'm doing that in stages, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the earlier steps and start working on the wings. So I'll get moving on this, and then we'll come back and see where we are on the rest of it. Alright, the fuselage is all glued together, and everything looks pretty good. I'm going to do a little sanding here and here due to some weird stuff. So now I'll take the clamp off. What's that? Oh, yeah. When I cemented something, got some cement in between this pad here and the fuselage. So I got a little bit of cleaning up to do. Hopefully it'll work. So I'm going to get busy on that real quick. Alright. So at this point, I have the fuselage pretty much glued up. The cover for the machine guns, the engine cowling is all glued. I still have to glue here and here. I'm just letting it dry where I cemented it here. The fit on this plane is really good. There's a few things that you have to be careful with though, and I can see where people would have problems with the front end if they don't do a lot of test fitting. But you know, if you take it slow and glue it in segments, then all should be well. Underneath here, one part that you'll want to make sure that you take a look at is that according to photos, that whenever this is assembled, first things first, on this under this part right here, once that's all assembled, there are two like ear type things, or for lack of a better term, that fit in the fuselage right here. The fit is such that it's kind of, it doesn't really fit like it should with these two ears to fit in here. So what I ended up doing is I ended up taking that part, I glued this on here like the instructions show, and the alignment was just off enough that it created quite a gap. I don't know if there's a photo of the underside of the aircraft. Yeah, a gap right here in this part. So I ended up popping it off and I redid it, but what I did is I just completely cut these parts off, these little ears, and just used these little raised lips here to align onto the fuselage to get it to align properly. If you use just these ears here in the indents in the fuselage, this part right here will be just slightly too far back, and the wing assembly will not fit right here. And I suppose a person could chop it off, but I did not want to do that. So what I did was I took it out, cut these pieces off pretty much completely, and just lined it up here and here, and then I was able to get this to line up properly. Now, whether you do that or not, there's going to be a seam right here between this radiator housing, or whatever you want to call it, and the fuselage. So, and it's kind of stepped. This part right here was slightly higher than this. So, using some putty, I just carefully filled it in to where it didn't get up underneath this part right here. Let it dry overnight, and then I was able to sand it smooth. And it's real smooth, and once I put the primer on, it should look fine. But according to photos of the real aircraft, there is no seam there, so you want to make sure that that is smooth. Okay, so up to that point though, everything is fine. I did have to, another thing I had to do, and it just could have been a combination of fit issues, and no amount of pre-fitting I don't think will help. But this part right here of this cover that goes over the gun breeches is just too thick to accommodate this instrument panel. So what I did is just using, I took most of the material off with a knife, and then used just a small sanding stick at a very shallow angle, and sanded the inside of that to make it thinner, and it stayed even. If you're careful, it will maintain an even profile all the way around. And then I was able to get it to fit properly, where it would glue flat here and here. And you want that to line up properly because the cowling fits up against that. So all I have to do is cement those once this is completely cured to my satisfaction, and then I can move on to the wings. So far on the wings, I have glued the radiator pieces, the radiator intakes in place. And a note on those, you'll want to make sure that these photo etch pieces, even after you glue them on, they stand just a little proud, a little too high on this part right here. So before you glue these in place, you'll want to sand those down, or you'll end up with gaps all around the edges here. So with that, while all that's drying, curing, and so on, I am going to call this video quits, and I will pick up with beginning the wing assembly. Talk a little bit more about the assembly of the wings on the next video, but for now, fuselage is pretty much done and ready to go for wing attachment. So with that, thanks for watching. Plastic Miles by a Regular Dude. Comments, questions below, and I'll see you on the next video.